Good morning, YouTube. In today's installment of the Strength series, we're going to be talking about building the base. This is going to be the first in a whole new series of presentations and videos that are going to talk about strength for the purpose of power building. So let's get started. So we first have to identify why it is important. So we often hear the sentiment that the tallest buildings have the widest base. If you want to what do all tall buildings in the world have in common? They have a wide, solid base. So how does that relate to the lifter? Well, the strongest lifters accumulate the largest body of work. So years of training, years of increasing volume, intensity, all over time. So tonnage over the lifetime. These are the things that separate the greats from the legends, essentially. How much time and effort do they devote into the sport? How much time and effort do they devote into their training? The same thing applies to you. The more time, effort, consistency, and training, and all of that you implement into yourself will develop you into a much better lifter. But it's important to understand that you don't just build strength by only doing heavy, low rep work. If you stick to only doing singles, the amount of volume, tonnage, work that you accumulate just really isn't all that much, and that's why it's not going to be the best for you in terms of actually getting you to where you want to be, which is your strongest version of yourself. If you rely solely on low rep work, you're not going to achieve that. One thing that's really important for a lot of people to understand is that testing your strength does not equal training. A 1 rep max is an expression of your strength, but it's not the only way that it actually shows itself, and it's definitely not the way that you build it. Now, I am an advocate of doing heavy singles in training, but it's mostly to keep in contact with the sport-specific need of actually performing singles. But you're not going to a new 1 rep max every single time you go into the gym. You're not trying to hit a new 1 rep max every time you go into the gym. You're trying to accumulate a large body of work and then go from there. The base you build up yourself upon will determine how high you reach. So you need to make sure that everything else is in place, that you accumulate volume, that you progress with higher volumes first and then intensify as the need presents itself. So base building for the novice is going to be a bit different, in my opinion. Now, generally speaking, base building is about the same, like the principles are applied for both novices and intermediates, but I believe that there's a couple other steps that I feel like a novice should adhere to, should keep into consideration, and these are things that need to be kind of the keys of long-term power building success. So essentially, you need to understand the importance and maintain the practice of consistency and effort. So with all my novices, what I have them focus on is mostly just training the same number of times per week. It's generally speaking, if you are just completely new to physical activity, you don't really need super specific training just yet. You just need exercise. You just need to become very regular with general exercise. So train the same number of times per week. Train yourself hard and push yourself, but without sacrificing future hard work and your technique. So like if you work super hard on Monday, but it prevents you from going to the gym on Wednesday, you overdid it, and that's not what you want. You want to be able to learn how to work hard enough that on Monday you can't continue, but you're going to recover by Wednesday, and then you repeat that process and then you go from there. The next thing is you want to make sure that your technique for whatever you do stays clean, crisp, and consistent. Now, it's not going to look perfect because you're a novice, you're a noob, you're not going to have the technical skills for it, but it should at least not be something that is going to lead you down the path of injury later down the line. So with a novice, when they are building their base, what I tell them is that they just need to get good at a variety of basic movement patterns, not specific exercises. That's why when I talk to a lot of my novices, I don't start them off with the squat, bench, deadlift, at least not in their barbell forms. I usually start off with things like a Romanian deadlift, a goblet squat, even using something like the leg press, where they just need to learn how to show them that their body can move independently from one another. Because one thing you'll notice if you do try to train a novice who's just never exercised a day in their life before, you tell them to move a part of their body, they're going to move something totally different. And honestly, just getting them through a certain movement pattern, and you can then hark onto their experience saying like, all right, with the squat, you're going to sit down in between your legs and you're going to push the knees out like you do on the leg press. And they're like, oh, okay, like on the leg press. And then their squat's not nearly as bad as if you try to coach them through the squat from literally nothing. So it's kind of a benefit from that point. Now, there's other important exercises that I do think are really important for power builders, and this is for the novice as well, because most novices, honestly, their goals are more so for the purpose of aesthetics, because most novices are young guys who want bigger biceps because they think it might get them girls, or the attention of guys because they heard that when you start lifting weights, everyone's starting to ask you about, hey, what do you do? What do you lift? What do you eat? And then maybe they want that. So who knows? But anyway, the other things that I want to the things that I want to be understood is that you don't need specific exercises when you're a novice. You just need to get a grasp of the basic movement patterns. So horizontal and vertical pushing and pulling. So bench, push-ups, chin-ups, lat pull down, cable row, inverted row, doesn't really matter. I do recommend that you have a squat, so goblet squats or like knee bend variation, so leg presses can work as well, and then a hinge. The most the movement that I use the most for a lot of my novices is just the Romanian deadlift, just because in my gym we don't have those training bars, and the bumper plates they aren't full size, unfortunately, for the 10-pound ones. They are slightly smaller, and like it's kind of like, what's the point? But anyway, so typically we're using like the fixed barbells or the dumbbells, and it's just a lot easier for them to get a hang of the hinge movement with something like that, or using a banded good morning. Now, with these other exercises that I mentioned, curls, tricep extensions, like direct tricep work, you can never go wrong with having too much, there's no such thing as too weak of a tricep, and there's no such thing as too strong of a tricep. Build your triceps up strong. They're responsible for a lot of your arm size, but also when it comes to the pressing movements, having big triceps is always going to be a plus. And then side and rear delt work. So the reason why I include pushes and pulls into the necessity for anyone, and especially the novice, is because squat, bench, and deadlift, the main three competition power lifts, they don't really build up the entire body all that much. That's why there's always these articles that say they suck at building muscle, but it's really just to grab your attention and kind of clickbaity. But really what they're trying to say is you need other things. Now, if you are a novice, you should be training relatively similar regardless of your goal. So it doesn't matter if you care mostly about size, if you care mostly about strength. In the beginning, you have none of those things, so what your training will accomplish both. Like, you're going to get bigger, you are going to get stronger, as you should, because if you are a true novice, if you want to be your biggest self, you need to learn how to train properly, and you need to have good technique. If you want to be your strongest self, it's going to be a lot easier to accumulate strength and develop strength with a base of muscle and technical mastery. So let's go into base building for intermediate/advanced. Now, here is where you kind of go into something more like what you're going to see with a lot of other programs, and what you're going to find a lot of information for this demographic to kind of like just kind of all converge into this one central idea, and that is simply this. You start at a manageable amount of volume and intensity and end like that training cycle, that mesocycle, that macro cycle at the highest amount of volume or tonnage and the heaviest loads. So let's go over some basic examples of progression. There's the volumizing approach, where you add sets and reps over time, where tonnage will increase as a result of the manipulation of sets and reps more so than weight, because weight will be added as needed. And then this is ideal for bodybuilding. So the idea here is you do a substantial amount of volume to build muscle, and then as a result of having bigger muscles, you need to lift heavier weights. So you manipulate weight in that sense, but generally speaking, most of your manipulation of volume, intensity, and these other variables will come from the sets and reps. So an example here is, let's say we do like a wave of, you start out the first week or the first 4 weeks with 3 sets of 10, then you go to 4 sets of 10, and then 5 sets of 10. Another thing that you can do is 3 sets of 10, 4 sets of 10, 5 sets of 8 with increased load. So 5 sets of 8 versus 4 sets of 10, they both come out to 40 reps, but because you have increased the load, the amount of tonnage you accumulate per set is a lot higher, so that's one way you can bump up progression, and then you return back to 3 sets of 10 with increased load. This is very similar to the Mike Israetel RP Renaissance periodization way of doing things, where you increase volume in the same mesocycle. This is one way of going about it. This is like wave loading, but this is just an example, right? So you increase volume, you manipulate sets and reps, and then you progress that way. That's the volumizing approach, and this is ideal for building muscle, because we know that there is a dose-response relationship with volume and muscle building and hypertrophy. So there's that benefit to it, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. But this, like I said, is just an overview and an example. The next version is intensification or intensifying approach. So you're focusing on adding load over time and volume will decrease appropriately. So this is just standard linear periodization. As intensity goes up, volume goes down. This is ideal for strength training. So an example here, let's say you do 3 sets of 5 and you do that for a couple of weeks. You just keep adding weight, then you plateau. And a plateau should be 2 consecutive weeks of being unable to add weight, or you have added weight, but you can't hit 3 sets of 5 anymore. You drop down to 3 by 3, then you add weight from there again. So let's say 5 pounds each week. You keep doing 3 sets of 3, 3 sets of 3, 3 sets of 3. You stall again for 2 weeks. You might take a deload or something of that nature. Then you do 3 sets of 1 and repeat that process until you hit a new 1 rep max or a new max in general. And then you go back down to 3 sets of 5. Now, most powerlifting programs that go from a base to a peak will typically start with a bit higher, but like I said, this is just an example. So honestly, you'll probably start with something more like 3 sets of 10, then you go down to 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 6, then you might do the 5, 3, 1 kind of way of doing things, and you go from there. But all that matters is you start at a manageable amount of volume and intensity. You increase those variables over time, and then at the end of the cycle, you are now lifting the most amount of volume and intensity, and then you return. So that way you spend a lot of time accumulating a lot of reps, a lot of easy work. So that way when you get to that harder part of the training, you have developed enough capacity to handle it. That is what base building is in a nutshell. So these are the basic movement patterns and key exercises that I think are really important for, especially for the novice. And I include these in here because when it comes to the novice power builder, the novice lifter, they can't just use solely the barbell movements. This is why I'm not the biggest fan of programs like Starting Strength, Strong Lifts, 5x5, and any of their derivatives, essentially. Now, I do have those programs available on my own channel where like there's free programs with that have taken elements of those training programs and modified them. But they are done so with these things into consideration. And the original novice program that I have on this channel is very much just like get good at being consistent, get good at a basic variety of exercises, and then go from there. So when it comes to like novices that I train, not only do I try to do some technique work with bench pressing, like whether that be barbell, dumbbell, or machine, I try to get them good at push-ups and dips. Like I want them to be able to move their body through space. It's also why I get them good at pull-ups and chin-ups. We do a lot of progressions to build up that capacity, build up that ability, and then as well as inverted rows or the Australian pull-up, however you want to call it. And then the hinge movement, because a lot of people just really suck at hinging. So stiff legs, Romanians, banded good mornings, these are things that I think are really important to teach a novice because this is what's going to develop them over time. Now, if you are going down the more concurrent approach and you want to make sure that you do have a balanced physique, you will need to include bicep work, you will need to include tricep work because the pushing variations don't really hit the long head of the tricep all that much. It's a small, minute point, and it becomes less important over time in my opinion, but generally speaking, you can't go wrong having too big and too strong of a tricep. And then of course you need to include side and rear delt work just to balance out the shoulder, keep the shoulders healthy. And if you so choose a lunge variation or a unilateral leg variation, the reason why I don't really like them is just because I have like a history of injury, and then also like me having a military background. Lunges, I don't know, I'm doing so many of them, I just kind of got sick of the movement. Kind of like if you ever were in the military or if you were let's say part of law enforcement or anything of that nature, once you get out you hate running just because you basically did that every single day for the past couple of years of however long your career was in that time. But why are compounds so necessary for the novice? And there's no need to justify compounds for the intermediate and advanced lifters because at that point they already accepted that this is what's going to help me progress the most. But novices, I feel like, especially nowadays, need the most amount of convincing with this. Compound movements, they hit the most amount of muscles, they allow you to lift the most amount of weight, and this provides you with relevant progression. So I know a couple people who come to the gym and will stick to exclusively machines. Now, this is not to say that machines are like 100% like useless or just completely inferior to building muscle. I have my biases toward the free weight exercises, but generally speaking, you're not like I cannot, in good conscience, say you are going to achieve the same results just by doing machines versus someone who has a combination of machines, dumbbells, barbells, and is able to accumulate a wide variety of work through there rather than just limiting yourself to only machines. And honestly, because the machines, they have different strength curves from gym to gym, they might not, like your own anatomy is going to affect the way that the machine feels for you. Whereas with the compound movements, there's modifications that are a lot easier to be made because you will move the weight around your body rather than the machine just kind of sticks you into one way of moving. I think it's much more beneficial. Oops. So another thing that needs to be kept in mind is the fact that compound movements do work for the most amount of people. They are the basics for a reason. So if you want to build a base, use basic exercises. Get good at the basic exercises. Bring your bench press up. If you're just a straight up novice and you can't do 10 push-ups, if you can't even do 20 push-ups, you have very little business trying to increase your bench press strength right now. If you can't do body weight dips, you don't really have that much business doing bench press work beyond just trying to accumulate some easy volume and get the technique right. You need to be able to do these things. But while these movements work the most for the most amount of people, they won't work the same for every single person. So some people are going to find it much harder to deadlift and they'll be able to recover much easier on squats. And some will be vice versa, or the opposite of that. So squats are going to be very taxing on their recovery, but deadlifts will do almost nothing to them and they feel fine. And then let's say with the deadlift example, some people will feel a better result or a better training effect from stiff legs versus RDLs, and someone else will feel better from Romanians versus stiff legs. So compound movements, they will vary in their effectiveness for each individual person, but what will remain constant is the fact that compound free weight exercises are going to be, or at least they should be, a very key part of your training. So if you aren't already including compounds in your exercises right now, do so. If you're not already including calisthenics in your training and you're a novice, do so. It doesn't matter if you can deadlift your body weight if you can't actually do a pull-up. So that's going to be what I believe is necessary for a novice to build a base, because what you're going to notice once you are an intermediate and advanced, most of your work will be these movements. Most of your work will be just variations built upon here, because eventually push-ups are going to be so easy for you. You're going to be able to knock out 40 of them like no problem any day of the week. And then so that's why you need to lift heavier on the bench press. So that's why you need to do weighted dips or something of that nature. That's why you include things like inclines, close grips. You build up from here. This is the base. So this is the base of exercises that you're going to progress on as a novice. And then when you are an intermediate and advanced, most of your work will come from these types of movements. So let's talk about rep ranges for novices and intermediates. When it comes to the novice, I think for strength work, I would go no lower than 4. And I think 6 is kind of where I would even cap that out for the main strength work. So let's say you start the workout with your deadlift, doing one set of 5, 3 sets of 4 to 6 or something of that nature, like just building up work in this range. I feel like is good because this rep range is low enough to stimulate strength development, but it also helps you keep form crisp. It's a lot easier to maintain technical proficiency with 4 to 6 reps than it would be if you try to do that with 8 to 12. Your 12th rep of a set will never look as clean as the first rep of a set. So with keeping the reps a bit lower, you get a lot more first reps, and that means your technique is a lot better, your technique development is a lot better, and that is what's going to drive a lot of strength gains early into your training life. But also by keeping it here, you're able to lift a slightly more moderate amount of weight, a slightly heavier amount of weight that will allow you to build strength over time. Now for supplemental work, I like to do 6 to 10 is good, but 8 to 12 I think is just as good because you're doing a lot of other movements with that lower rep range. So when you do things like your dumbbell work, your machine work, then I think 8 to 12 is a good range. And then if you do your accessory work, so your curls, your calisthenics, so push-ups, sit-ups, dips, pull-ups, assisted pull-ups, whatever, I think doing it in the higher rep ranges is going to benefit you because for the novice, like I said earlier, size and strength will develop concurrently for novices really, really easily. Now, if you're more advanced, you're going to find that the window becomes more like a barn door of things that you can do. So there was a time where for my deadlift, I did 3 sets of 1 to 3 reps. And every time I could hit 3 sets of 3 with a weight, I would go up in weight and start back with like 3 sets of 1, then 2, 1, 1, 3, 2, 1, and then try to get 3 sets of 3 and then go up in weight. Very similar things with 2 sets of 5, 3 sets of 6, 4 sets of 8. With the supplemental work, when you're an intermediate, I do think, or intermediate to advanced, I do think that you can kind of push progression on 2 movements in the same training session. So for example, something that I did for quite a while, and this helped me get to my 315 bench, I would do, let's say, 5 sets of 2 to 5 reps. I would add weight only when I could hit like the first set or first 2 sets for 5 reps, or if I could hit all 5 sets for 5, depends, but both of them work. But then on my second movement, I would do something like, let's say, a close grip or an incline, and I would choose something like 4 to 8, 6 to 10, and I would push progression in that range as well. And I would find that as a intermediate to an advanced lifter, that's pretty reasonable to do. You can push progression on 2 movements, whereas when you're a novice, it becomes a bit harder on recovery. You just need to get in, get your strength work, build up a base of work that you get through other exercises, and go from there. With the accessory and bodybuilding work, you can go a bit lower rep here too, just because your strength endurance is there, you're more neurologically primed, you're able to handle slightly heavier loads even on the bodybuilding work, so you can go slightly lower. But generally speaking, when it comes to accumulating volume to actually build muscle, so accessory work is just really bodybuilding work, 8 to 12, 10 to 15 plus, so you can go up to 20 or 30, but I really don't like to. I think 15 is kind of like my ideal range, but it just depends on the person. But if you are an intermediate to advanced lifter, concurrent training will still work for quite a long time. It does become less effective the more advanced you become, but this will take such a long amount of time that for most people, I think it's kind of irrelevant, just because barely anyone, at least barely anyone that I know, lifts longer than 5 years. Like, to actually get to 5 years of consistent training. So you do the same number of workouts, 52 weeks in a row, 5 times. That is very rare to see. Even more rare is 10 years. So once you get to that point, like that's when like concurrent training will be a bit harder to manage, and block training will be a bit more beneficial to you. However, for the first, I would even say 5 years, because I've been training concurrently for almost my entire lifting career up until this point, and have found that I still reached a good amount of strength for the time that I've been training. So, but it's important to understand that it does become less effective over time, and that's something we will cover in future videos down the line. So now let's talk about simple progression methods, because like I said, when you are building a base, you are trying to go from the most manageable amount of work to increasingly more difficult amounts of work, and then you deload and restart that progression all over again. So the most simple one is just simple linear progression. You add weight each week or each session. So this is something you see in most commonly in 3x5 and 5x5 training methods, but it works. This is something that will work even if you're a novice. Even if you're an intermediate. Oftentimes people think that simple linear progression only works for the novice lifter. It doesn't. So it does have a plateau built into it, which I will admit, and this is why I'm not the biggest fan of it. However, to say that it's completely useless for intermediate and advanced lifters would be dishonest for me as a strength coach. Next would be AMRAP sets. So I know Sweet Burns, 531, Grayscale LP, a lot of these programs use something like this, where it's just like you take the last set to failure, so plus sets or doing something of that nature. This is something that is really easy for a lot of people to do, and it's really easy to put into your program. So rather than a top set where you just go to the highest weight you can lift, you just on the last set of the workout or the exercise, so that you're trying to push progression on, you take that last set all the way to technical failure, not actual muscle failure, because you still want technique to be crisp up until that last rep, and you do as many reps as you can. The next simple type of progression is just double progression. So you add reps before adding load. So let's say in week 1 you're doing 135 for 5. In your first set you hit it for 5, then you hit it for 4 in the second and third. But then in week 2 you hit it for 6. And if let's say you're working in that 4 to 6 rep range that I was mentioning earlier for the novice, because you hit that first set for 6, you can jump up in weight next week. You go to 140, and then you do 5, 4, 5, 5, 4. The next week, like let's say week 4, you hit it for 6 again. You go up to 145, and then let's say you do 3 sets of 4. You keep using 145 until you hit a set of 6, or until you hit all 3 sets for 6. Both of these will work. So really common or popular versions of the double progression system that I've seen recently are the evolving rep range system, which is something that I think is actually very useful. It helps you because strength and size is not linear. So by extending the amount of ways you are able to progress and extend the amount of time you stick with a certain amount of weight, I think is very beneficial. So using two of these systems, the evolving rep range system, where let's say you take a weight that you started out doing 3 sets of one with, and then you build up to a point where you hit a set of 3 or all 3 sets for 3. I think that's a valid way of progression, and you can do this with other rep ranges that we mentioned in the last slide. Or the rep goal system, where let's say you want to bench 225 for 20. Once you and you try to hit that in as few sets as possible. So let's say your goal is to hit 20 reps in 3 sets. Once you can hit that goal, so in set 1 you do 10, in set 2 you do 6, and last set you do 4, because now you hit 20. Then you add weight, and then you just keep going there from there. That's a simplified version of the rep goal system from Steve Shaw of Massive Iron, and you can find more information about evolving rep ranges from the channel Natural Hypertrophy. And that is it. So when it comes to base building, just as a recap, you start out with a moderate, manageable amount of load, and then you build up over time. You either volumize, adding sets and reps, or you intensify, or you do both if you do something like a double progression system. If you are a novice, building a base is more than just actual mathematics and progression over time. It's also about building a baseline of performance. You need to be able to move your body through space. You need to be able to do calisthenics. That's why I think calisthenics is such a great complement to powerlifting style training, and especially bodybuilding style training. Calisthenics does build a great amount of muscle, and it builds very aesthetic amounts of muscle. So if you're a novice, build a base with calisthenics in addition to your weight training. If you're more intermediate and advanced, have an understanding of the manipulation of sets and reps and intensity, because this is how you're going to progress over your lifelong lifting career. Progression and programming are going to be very vital for your continued progress, because if you are not, enhanced by anabolics or anything of that nature, then you are going to be limited by your understanding of progression, of your limited understanding of programming. So you need to make sure that you have a firm grasp on it, so that way you're actually able to move forward, build the body regimes, get as strong as you possibly want. Because for a natural lifter, you do need to get stronger if you want to get bigger, and if you want to be the biggest you can, you need to get stronger, and if you want to be the strongest you can, you do need to build size to accommodate that. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Carlsa King, standstrength.com. If you want to reach out to me for coaching, your own personalized concurrent training program, just let me know. I have my link in the description. And if you are not subscribed to the channel already, please like, comment, and subscribe. I would really appreciate your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.